Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. So, Reggie, how you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing very well. It's always, I tend to do well in the mornings, and it's always an even better morning when I'm speaking with you. So it's good to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Same here. And as we like to go through our traditional method of getting started, is starting with our gratitude moment. You want to go first, Reggie?
Yeah. So as people who have heard this before know that I tend to rely on some basic, simple things, indoor plumbing and a refrigerator with, edible food in it. But I just spent a weekend with 10 people that I've met 22 years ago. And we have in common that we all at some point in our lives enacted a vision quest, meaning we spent money, traveled somewhere, and then didn't eat for 4 days.
Wow.
And there's a lot more to it, but I'll just say that piece. And I'm just really grateful for that kind of sustained relationship. We hadn't met prior to the year 2000, and then we've met almost every year since then, just as an annual gathering. And I'm just really grateful because I think besides health and indoor plumbing and good food, friendship is one of the things in my life that continues to sustain me. So I'm just very grateful for that particular group, but my friends in general.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind, and the 24 hours to pursue my purpose. My mother still to be alive and have sound mind and a good heart. And again, as you say, roof over my head, food to eat, and then the infinite possibilities that this day is going to provide. So I'm grateful for those things as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
My gratitude moment is pretty much always the same. I may add one or two, but I always believe in just those core things that we take for granted, that
Yeah,
people take for granted, like the ability to see, hear, walk, talk, get out of bed, have sound mind. If any of those are missing, that becomes your dominant thought and concern over anything else that you may be stressing out, working on, hoping for, praying for. And just to have the ability, especially at this age I am now, it's funny, the older you get, at least for me, I realize that the more you appreciate just the health of your body, just the functioning of your body on a regular basis. You appreciate that more where you take all that for granted when you're young. But then when you start to see, like I tell my friends, particularly close friends of mine who I grew up with, and predominantly most of them are all black, I tell them that 50s is an unforgiving decade. This is a decade that whatever vice that you have, whatever mistreatment you had, whatever bad habits you created throughout your life, this is a decade where all that comes to fruition. So if you've been drinking, you've been smoking, you don't exercise, you have a bad diet, you know, all that's going to show in your 50s. You've been able to kind of get away with it. 40s started to show a little bit, but 50s is like now I think it's your body's like it takes its toll. And if you're lucky, if you get out of the 50s, and then if you do get out of the 50s, the 60s are going to be horrendous. So for me, being health conscious, being grateful, changing my spirit, changing the circle of people I deal with, all those things for me are putting me on the right path. So I have a enjoyable 50s and hopefully I get into the 60s as well. Prayfully,
yeah,
I should say.
yeah. I love two things that you said that I just want to comment on really quickly. One is the 50s, 60s thing because I'm listening to that as I think as a 68-year-old, so I can
Yeah.
I would say to anybody that hears this, listen to what King is saying because there's some truth in that. The body, even if we take care of it, I mean, just over time, it kind of wears out, even if
Right.
we do a good job with it. So it's not like I'm in good health, and I stay fit, and I have a fit 68, healthy 68-year-old body. It's nothing like my healthy 28-year-old body. It's a different body. So it's still fit and healthy, but it's different. That's one. So I appreciate you saying that. And the second thing is because we're talking about connections and, being fully human and cultural givens is a big part of what we have been discussing, that the way you articulated why you repeat these basic, things that you're grateful for: good health, sound mind, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I've pretty much done the same thing, but there's a side of me that I think if, God forbid we had the same people listening to the podcast over and again, like I feel like I owe somebody something new. So in addition to, food and refrigerator, indoor plumbing, et cetera, I always try to like take one other thing and add that to my basics. So I love that you said what you said, because those are the things we do take for granted.
Hmm.
And we only notice them when something goes wrong, when you start not being able to remember something, or if you're having something in your gastrointestinal tract or your chest or your shoulders or your eyes that doesn't feel right. Then we say, oh, I got to take care of my eyes or my belly, whatever it is. So I really appreciate how you you always bring that sound mind, sound body, good health, and then your mom still being with you. And I just always want to bring something else in new, so I don't want to bore people.
Well, yeah, I understand that. But I tell people this, man, that regardless of, and this kind of gets into our conversation that we're going to have today, which is our fourth episode on the culture of givens, regardless of what your thoughts are about Donald Trump, one of the things that you have to look at, because see, for me, what I look at, I study behavior, I study systems, I study ideology, and I take away, or I remove my bias from that. Because if you bias going into it, then you're not going to understand the core functionality of things, because your emotions get caught in the way. But if you understand brilliantly what he's done, it's like he has shown you the model for how you get people engaged. And that's repeating the same message. I tell a lot of my clients when I talk to them about business and getting their messaging out there, whether you agree with what he's saying or not, one thing you understand is what he stands for. Make America great again. He's going to build a wall. Mexico's going to pay for it. And he wants to make America great. Simple. Never changes. That's the core message, right? And so it allows everybody to come on board and get along with that messaging. And that's what I try to get folks to realize. It's the repetitiveness of the message that people really get with. Even in marketing, they say, if you do any kind of marketing at all, it's 7 or 8 attempts before people really catch on and say, wow, okay, maybe I do want some Burger King, or maybe I do want some McDonald's. And what I really hate is how our society, we get on the emotional feelings we have about Trump because of his character and what he says and everything else, but we miss the fact that he's forever changed politics. Like he saw that politics, as we talk about culture of givens, that politics were all about prior to Trump. It's about candidates going out there, stating their platforms, stating their policies, and then kind of going around and asking the American society for votes based off, here's what I want to represent you, here's what I stand for, here's what I'm willing to change, etc. And what he realized is that, and sports did it first when they came out with ESPN and they started doing sports analysts, and they realized that with the analysts, people like to give their opinions and hear the opinions of others. And people will pay for that because it becomes a personality contest. And if you like the analyst's personality, you're going to watch the show. Even though they're not giving, like, I used to watch George Michael. I know you remember George Michael. The George Michael sports machines come on, and he would give an analytical analysis of the games. And it was very thorough. It wasn't his opinion. He just broke things down in a very charismatic, very professional manner. But it shifted from that to now sports became so about the personality of the analysts and what their thoughts were and their opinions. And they were, even though they're wrong, they actually give their take on what game's going to come up, and they're wrong 90% of the time if people tune in. Trump saw that and added it to politics. So now politics is about feel goods. It's about who you like. It's about popularity. It's not about the policies and the platforms. Most people can't articulate. I ask people this: when Hillary Clinton was running for office against Trump back in 2016, I said, could you articulate Hillary Clinton's platform? What she was working for, what she advocated for? Most people couldn't, even though they were going to vote for her. it was like, well, we're going to vote for her because she's not Trump. And the same thing with Biden. We're going to vote for him because he's not Trump. But you really can't articulate what he most people couldn't, unless you're really politically astute and really into the game. Most people, your common person, could not articulate what Biden's platform was and what he stood for. And so I just wanted to talk about that as we talk about cultural givens. Is culturally we shifted from a politics standpoint of how we view politics and how we deal with it. Even now. And I was watching Bill Maher. He made this comment, which I thought was really right on point. He said that you used to be able to have certain things that unite America as a country. You used to say, okay, Russia, and everybody in America would get united among Russia. No matter he was Democrat, he was Republican. Russia was a common enemy. Then China became a common enemy, or we had a common enemy. And they even talked about Independence Day, where they blew up the White House. They're seeing where the White House is blown up by the aliens. And he said, people always believe that Martians, when they came, that would unite the whole planet. And he's saying nowadays he believes that the cultural divides is so much there that people, the White House got blew up. Certain people on the right will be cheering that the White House got blew up, and that's what they deserve. Then people on the left will have a different take. So we become so divided now because of that. And I just kind of wanted to see what your thoughts were on how growing up culturally plays a role in us now picking a team and just being adamant with that team, regardless of whether or not it's right or wrong. It's just, this is the team I want to ride with, wherever.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on there. How much time do we have? So a couple of things come up immediately for me. So that the point about that unifying the country with unfortunately, it always seemed to be a common enemy. Like we needed an enemy in order to be unified, but that's not unique to the United States. That's true in almost any nation or culture. But for me, one of the most telling shifts in the last, Trump definitely exacerbated it and really made it come alive. And I want to say more about that in just a minute. But really, I think since the Newt Gingrich years, the divisiveness has been growing. That's, in my take. So, and Trump was just better at it, in many ways. But it used to be, we could disagree as Americans, whether it was, a really challenging issue that was divisive, like abortion or the Vietnam War or whatever it happened to be. And we would have debates about it. Nowadays, when we disagree, if you and I, not you and I in real life, but if a lot of people who disagree with each other accuse the other of being un-American or not being American. So if you disagree with me, you're not really an American. And that's if you think about what underlies that, that's terrifying. For a country that brags about freedom of speech and equality and due process and equal protection of the laws, disagreement now is, oh, you're not really American. And that's the extremes of the left and right. I mean, closer to the center, that doesn't really happen as much. I think there are some sane, moderately intelligent people closer to center, where most of the work gets done anyway.
Right.
But the cultural given piece, for me, that's a really complex issue. And I'll say this about it first. The better able you or I or anyone is to be able to seek, but especially to take multiple perspectives, the less likely we are to be increasingly divisive. So it's not that we think that every view is equal or the same. I'm not saying that. But the ability to understand another's view, even when I strongly disagree with it, that's again, my bias is development. That's a developmental move. So the easiest example for me for that is the abortion debate. It's not an easy debate, but it's an easy example. Because I understand both sides of that issue. I understand how someone who can believe that human life begins at conception and want to protect that life, that makes perfect sense to me. I also understand how someone can want to make sure that a woman doesn't have anybody else telling her what she can do with her body. Both of those arguments are very real and sensible to me. And there are people at the extremes of in that argument who can't hear the other perspective. Mm-hmm. If you're in favor of choice, you're a murderer because you are willing to grant a woman the right to abortion. And if you're against choice, I don't even know what the adjectives and nouns are there. If you are anti-abortion, you basically are talking about going back to the dark ages where women are told what they can and can't do, and keeping in mind that women have only had the right to vote for 102 years in this country. That was back in 1920, which is frightening if you think about it. So, to your question, I don't know what it was that allowed me to develop beyond my cultural givens. I know I've done it and continue to do it. And that's the question we're really looking at. Why is it that some of us easily get caught up in this divisiveness? If you disagree with me, you're un-American. If you are pro-choice, you're a murderer. If you're pro-abortion, if you're anti-abortion, you're against women's rights. All of these extremes and generalizations, and for me, it's tied in with education, tied in with parenting. And when I say education, I don't mean formal schooling. It includes that, but education for me is paying attention to the world, including books in terms of real life experiences, and being able to be curious and tease different things apart and think critically. Some of the things that we talk about having sound mind and all of that. So I'm going to just pause there because I don't know if I really addressed the specific question you answered. But I think, again, I just think it's very, very complex. And one of the things I'm very much against is anyone who says, the 5 things you need to know if you want to save the world, or the 10 bullet points to remove divisiveness in America. Because if you can reduce it to 5 or 10 bullet points in the world I live in, the level of complexity that I see, if you think it's reducible to 5 bullet points, then you probably don't have much to say. That's useful, I think.
No, I agree with you 100%. Yeah. But I would push back on you and say that that really speaks to my point about Trump.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
Is that he only speaks in those 3 bullet points. I mean, Hillary, to me, was probably the most qualified candidate that we've seen somebody run for president in years, as far as her experience as a state senator, her experience as a secretary of state, as the woman, the first lady, just all that breadth of experience should position you to be a president if it was a man, right? But my point is, her platform was so deep that you had to be a thinker, you had to be a reader, you had to be someone who was politically astute to really understand what she was advocating for. And that's kind of where I'm going with this, is that you're absolutely right. People who read, people who study, people who are critical thinkers, you're insulted when someone tries to come and say, I'm going to summarize the solution in these 3 bullet points, in these 5 bullet points. But the common person is not reading. They're not thinking along those lines. They're working, and they don't really like their job much. They really haven't tapped into their purpose. They live a career whether it pays a lot or not, they're not really happy at home. So they escape into whether it's theater politics or they escape into theater sports, and they look for a simple solution to their problem. Yeah. And so that's all I was really going with this. As we talk about building now fully human connections, I think we have to come up with some form of step-by-step. Here's the first 4 ways you can begin. Now, we don't say this will get you there, but this at least puts you on a path of becoming fully human, or the journey that you're beginning to really begin to understand that, because I give you an example just real quick before I summarize my point. Is I know the gentleman who I grew up with my whole life, and he was a close friend of mine. And now that we are in our mid 50s, he's beginning to see that he doesn't know what he wants to do with his life. And it's becoming daunting to him. And that reality is frightening to him. And I can imagine that because I've actually been cultivating what I want to do with my life for the last 30 years, as far as the personal development, the growth, the books that I study, the people I talk to, all those things have really, that's how I live. My purpose guides me. It's like I'm in tune to it. And you can imagine not being connected to my purpose, and to be at 50 and not have a connection to your purpose when you realize that sports don't really sustain you anymore, and having sex and chasing women, all these things that he allowed himself to just really excel at no longer sustains his fulfillment anymore. Now he's lost. And so for people like him, I can't say, well, here's some books you should read. I mean, logically that makes sense, and that worked for me. But I'm trying to think of what we can do to kind of put him in that direction, at least point him toward that path. We know there's no microwave fix for it, but is there a way we can get people at least pointed in that direction?
Yeah. And thank you for just making that not course correction, but bringing us back to that example of Trump as this simple message. Here it is. And unfortunately, he didn't really care about the people he was saying that to.
Right.
It was just self-aggrandizing. That's what he's done his whole life. And we know that. But what is it about us as a species, and then narrow it down, us as Americans, and then more selectively, us as Americans who want somebody to come along and make everything okay for us? Now, I don't believe, I'm not waiting for somebody to make it okay for me. You're not. I'll project that. I'll take a risk and say you're not waiting for somebody else.
You're absolutely right.
To take care of you. But for a lot of reasons, many of which are very understandable, there are millions of Americans who want that. My life isn't turning out as I hoped it would for a variety of reasons. And we could spend days talking about those reasons, but it's real. And when a guy comes along and says, we're going to make America great again, my parenthetical comment on that is, oh, again? So give me the example of what year it was great and for whom. Because if you go backwards, you're going to be leaving somebody out. Right? No matter where it is, it wasn't great for somebody and still isn't. Right. So that's the flaw. But that's a critical thought. Again, so if you were white and World War II veteran, if you survived a war, even that wasn't great because you were in a war. Post World War II era for about 10 or 15 years, if you ignore Korea, that was kind of like a good time for a lot of white people in the suburbs. It was. I think it was. That's when I was born. Then. But even then, in order for that to happen, millions of American men had to go to Japan and Germany, to Europe and Asia to fight a war. So there really, there was a flaw in Make America Great Again from the very beginning. We know that, but it was simple, and there were people who were suffering, and they wanted somebody to stop their suffering, and they felt that they were victims, that the system wasn't serving them anymore. So there's a wonderful phrase from Thomas Merton, the Catholic Trappist monk who died in 1967, who was just this brilliant guy who was had conversations with both Martin Luther King Jr. and with Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, and the three of them met first through correspondence, and then when Thich Nhat Hanh visited the United States. But Merton spoke about, and this is when I read this phrase, it stayed with me for years. I still use it. He spoke about the next time you use personal first-person pronoun like I or me or mine, he said, make sure there's really something there. And this is the phrase that I love. And that it's not just the anonymous authority of the collectivity speaking through your mask, the anonymous authority of the collectivity. And going back to how you began this conversation with the sports guys and the commentators, and now we have that for professional performance news commenters. They're not journalists; they just tell you their opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of us, even if we think we're critical thinkers, it's easy to not see what the culture is giving me, the anonymous authority of the collectivity. And it's always there. The biggest piece of it is advertising, because we just, everywhere we get bombarded by it. But it comes through political spokespeople. It comes through journalists and news commentators. And we get this view of the world that basically underlying it all wants to sell us something. That's the underlying piece of the, even with the news stuff, because that's all funded by advertisers. So there's this view of the world that if I'm not really careful, I think I know what's going on, but I only know what the anonymous authority wants me to know about. Unless I go looking on my own, I only know what mainstream media, left or right or center, they have editors. They pick which news stories to air in the half hour of nightly news, in the half hour of local news. And so you're getting a really skewed view. And cultural givens, if to go back to the core of what we've been talking about, if we don't challenge them, because the culture is constantly giving us things, even after those early childhood things that our parents gave us.
Right.
And right now, today, if I'm only getting cultural commentary from Fox News or Newsmax or MSNBC or CNN, or pick your demon or your angel, whichever one it's going to be, I'm getting a skewed view of the world. And the easiest thing for anybody left or right to do is what you see, as you said, what Donald Trump did. I'm going to build a wall. I'm going to get Mexico's going to pay for it, and we're going to make America great again. And when he was leaving office, we're going to keep America great. Which was that was as good as Subway advertising as health food. When they began doing that, and I occasionally eat a Subway sandwich, not regularly, but I do. So I'm not criticizing them, but that was one of the greatest advertising successes ever. Oh yeah, do that, with this amount of lettuce, and it's kind of, this is really, really a healthy sandwich. Come on, put cold cuts in it. It tastes great, but it's not healthy. Come on. Right. But that's kind of the American way. We're consumers of advertising. So yeah, what would it be? Maybe that's what you and I have to do. What would be the 3 to 5 bullet points that we could come up with that don't say this is the end all be all, this is all you ever need? In fact, I'll say one last thing, and I'm going to be quiet because I want to hear your response. One of the testimonials from the new book, the book that this is based on, Healing America's Narratives, came from a guy that has no online presence. I couldn't find him, but I heard him interviewed in a collective trauma summit last year. His name is Eduardo Duran, Vietnam vet, and his mother was Italian, his father was Native American, and his mother was Italian, not Italian American. And he was brilliant. He was funny. He was humble. And I tried to find him because I wanted to have a conversation with him, and there was no online footprint. So finally I found an address, I'm not going to say it out loud, out in the West. And I wrote a letter, snail mail, I sent it to him. And he got back to me via email. And he wrote a testimony for the book. And what he said, the part that really struck me, because he's honest, he said, Reggie Mara has given us the diagnosis. He said a lot of things, but this is the one I remember. Given us the diagnosis and part of the cure if we are to survive even into the near future. So what I loved about it was he didn't say, and the cure. He said part of the cure. Because, I think my book's pretty good, but I don't pretend that that's all you need to know, right? So he was really precise with the language, and that's what we're talking about. Not everything you need to know to save America. But, what would be succinct, understandable, and embraceable by a lot of people to begin to move conversation forward in a really positive way to stop the divisiveness or to at least alleviate some of the divide. We're not going to suddenly stop it, but to begin to move the conversation in a saner, more receptive way where we listen to each other. So put a period there, and I'll be quiet now. So.
No, I appreciate what you're saying, and as you were saying that, I was really beginning to think about the new givens that culture is giving us now, and how my nieces and great nieces are being impacted by that, and growing up in a society in which, like for example, the news used to. I believe the news always has been biased, but at least it used to be somewhat credible in the context that there were some journalists that you saw that you respected and that you would love to hear what their perspective was as they gave you the news. And I was watching Jon Stewart. He has a new show he does called "What's Went Wrong" or something like that.
The problem with Jon Stewart, yeah.
The problem with Jon Stewart. I just recently, just this week, started watching a couple of his episodes, and he really talked about what's wrong with the media. And see, this is what I'm talking about. When you really study Trump, again, this is not a pro-Trump. I'm talking about from an analysis standpoint.
Yeah.
That he tapped into what was already problems, and as you said, exacerbated those problems. Like we've always talked about how the media is fake news. He didn't come up with the term, but he just took it and he branded it and it tapped into the people who already feel that way. And to that point, Jon Stewart showed where they talked about the Mueller report. And they were talking about how the news hyped this up so much, like when Robert Mueller was put on the task and who Mueller was and his background. And if he comes on the task, he's so straightforward. He's the cop, right? And now that he's on the task, he's going to come at Trump. And they kept on building up like it was a movie. And then they will say, well, Mueller hasn't even taken lunch today. That was a report. He's so engrossed with the mission, and then he's going to drop this. So they kept on building up the anticipation, and finally the report came out, and it was like 400 pages, and it's online. You can download it. And then it shifted from building all this anticipation to, well, there's no collusion. And it's like, but if you watch, and he had several clips, and it's fascinating to watch, where it's like CNN to MSNBC, and they're all saying the same thing, like bombshell. I mean, literally using the same words, no matter who the analyst was. They were using the exact same language on every show. And it's like, this is where I see why we're so divisive, because people condemn Fox all the time for doing it. And, if you're on the left, you're saying, look what Fox is doing. Fox just constantly feed their people garbage, and their people are just soaking it up because, we throw all our racist bias towards that, But then if you look at CNN, you look at MSNBC, they do the exact same thing, and just because you may agree with that thought or they're not spewing hate, but they're still programming the listeners with stuff that's sensational news, which is not really news. And that's a new culture of giving. I'm seeing that's coming from that our children, like I said, not my children, but my nieces and my great niece, they're growing up in a world where that is now the norm. They're never going to know a Walter Cronkite type of reporting or what Watergate did. And they show where several news people, even I can't believe Robert Woodward, who came
out, Woodward,
Bob Woodward, he came out and even said this is the next Watergate. And he showed like a montage of different analysts saying this is the next Watergate, this is the next Watergate, this is the next Watergate. So you can, to your point about this autonomous force that's coming and giving us the information that is so much prevalent now. So not only are we getting it on the news, then you have to get on your phones. So now you can't even escape it. So you carry around a little device in your hand, the notifications coming there, and it's on Facebook. So even if you don't watch the news and you just happen to be on Facebook because you're following people, your friends are posting it. So you really can never escape it at all. And that's the problem that I see going forward, is that we're constantly being programmed. And I just kind of want to sum up my point to say this, that, my background is engineering. and I started off in IT. And back in the day, when I got into computers, you had to do such things as reformat the hard drive, and you had to do what's called an F disk at the very beginning to really uh, recondition the partition of the hard drive, because the formatting is still level of data. But if you F disk it, which was change the partition, then it wipes out everything. You can't, it's unrecoverable at that point. So what I do every morning going through my uh, gratitude moment is kind of conditioning myself to be ready for all the madness that's coming at me. So I'm programming my mind. I'm pre-programming my mind to be in a positive state of mind. Like one of the things that I do when I do my podcast, the first question I ask every interviewer that I'm interviewing on my podcast, as well as interviewee, I should say, as well as when I do my meetings, I say, "What's your spiritual energy number?" From 0 being life sucks to 10 being life is awesome. I said Einstein, says that everything is energy, energy is everything. And if you're a 2 or 3, we're not gonna have a good conversation. There's no point in continuing the interview, because if you're a 2 or 3, you're not gonna be engaged. You're gonna be antagonistic. You're not gonna be present. And everyone loves that. So what I'm going with all this, what I'm saying is this: that at the end of the day, most people don't realize they're not controlling their thoughts. And that's why I asked that question. I want to know who I'm talking to, and have you programmed your mind for positive engagement? Or are you thinking thoughts that you created yourself, that you put there through your own, whatever it is, your rituals in the morning, whether you read this book, whether you pray, whether you meditate, whether you just sit back and just silently reflect, whatever it is you do to kind of get your mind ready for the onslaught of someone else's control. And that's what I believe is a new cultural givens. And that's why I think that we're going off the rails now, where people are taking everything to the extreme. And that's the world we kind of slowly, in my opinion, sliding down a slippery slope into extremism on whatever the level, whatever the extreme may be, left, right, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I mean, across the board, I have one thing I want to like push back a little bit on, but across the board, I agree with you, and I think not to blame cable news, what we used to call cable news, we still have it, I guess, but once we got into a 24-hour, 7-day a week news cycle, which I didn't grow up with that.
Right.
I mean, I grew up with a black and white TV with 7 stations on it, so there definitely wasn't that. But they have to fill it, and you have God knows how many news outlets now trying to fill 24 hours a day. So going back to the Jon Stewart piece, I actually did see that one on the media, and the bombshell, bombshell, bombshell. I remember that really, really clearly. And what they were doing was speaking to their political hope of what this will be once Robert Mueller, who's going to be our hero, gets done with it. And so again, that was no news there. That wasn't journalism. That was
Right.
Here's what we hope is going to happen, and they did. I remember the clip because bombshell. It's going to be a bombshell. It's going to be a bombshell. And both Fox does it, CNN does it, and MSNBC. They all do it in their own for their own content. That's a real problem. As you just pointed out, I'm not going to go back into that, but it's because we have, as you 24-hour, news outlets, and a lot of people live with this thing in their faces or in their ears. The one thing I would say, and I'm no superhero here, but I use Facebook, I use LinkedIn to market the new book. I've gone, I'm taking baby steps on Twitter and Instagram, which I don't know how people do Twitter all the time, because that just drives me crazy, that thing. But I'm trying to use it. But I use it. I use these platforms. I don't spend time scrolling through to see what's going on with the world. But it's possible to have access to the platforms and be disciplined enough not to waste my time on it. In other words, here's why I'm using Facebook. Here's why I'm using Instagram. Here's why I'm using LinkedIn, whatever. And I use it for a specific reason. In most cases, it's keeping in touch with old friends who are geographically distant. That would be Facebook for the most part. And LinkedIn for business reasons. So every one of us has the autonomy put the phone down and not to spend a lot of time on those, on those other media. For some reason, it seems millions and millions of people choose to just do that. But that's a choice. And it's going back to cultural givens. Oh, now I'm used to, I have to keep up with what's on Twitter. I have to keep up on what either MSNBC is saying or Newsmax or Fox is saying. I have to keep up with my feed on Facebook or the Twitter feed. I have to keep up, and that's what a lot of people do then. But I like to keep up with going for a walk in the woods or in a local park or sitting on my meditation bench for half an hour in the morning or whatever. Those are my biases. Um, I don't, none of us has to buy into the hooks that all of the media outlets have out there for us. We don't have to. Yet enough people do that the advertisers keep banging out millions of dollars, billions of dollars a year across the board to buy advertising space because they know that people are going to see it. So I'm agreeing with you. That's the cultural given. Fill up the news cycle 24 hours a day. How are we going to do that? Oh, we'll just keep talking about what we hope is going to happen and our opinions about it. Because I want news. I read it, and even that's not perfect, but I read what the journalists write about a story. I don't read, well, I do read op-ed things, but that's not news to me. That's a moderately intelligent person's opinion, and sometimes I can learn something. But, I read the news. Occasionally I bump into it online and I'll listen to a clip, but I can't imagine listening to any of them, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, Newsmax, on an ongoing, over and over basis. That's a choice that I think everyone has.
I agree with you to a certain extent, but I think that after a certain point, they lose the ability to make that choice.
I agree.
So I think logically, you're absolutely right. Everyone has that choice from a logical standpoint. But it's like I look at even my brother, right? My brother has been or is a football fan. He's been a football fan our entire lives. I mean, he's a true fanatic. Like I used to watch football. I don't watch it anymore. I love my Sundays, right? So I can't commit myself to watching football all day and getting caught up in that. Plus the bias and all those things turn me off of football, but that's a different conversation. My point I'm making is my brother is a San Francisco 49ers fan, and he lives for them, like to the point where it's football season. He watching pre-football. He watches the analyst shows about it. He's got his phone, getting notifications from the San Francisco team. Until week 4, and it does it every year. Until week 4, they start losing. He shifts that. But what I'm saying is this: I don't think he has a choice. It's like I look at that and I say to myself, why do you sit here and give this much time and effort? It's like Saturday is just planning for Sunday, and then you have Monday, right? So so his whole for that 16, 17 weeks that football is on, he's centered and locked in on football, and everything centers around that for him. You don't call him on a Sunday; he's watching the game, And my point I'm going with this is that now with technology, and this is what I love about technology, just shifting for a minute, I'm going to come back to this. When I do Zoom meetings, when I do my podcast, and people let me into their homes like you right now, and I see the books behind you, you can't possibly have that many books and have time to be dedicated to football, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, Facebook. You couldn't do it. You would have to, and so you have to make that choice as far as which one you're going to do. They even now have backgrounds that have a fake background of books behind people so they can seem intelligent, so they can look like, well, at least I can look like I read books, but I know I really don't read books. And that's the sad state of affairs where we're going. It's like you don't even have to do the work anymore. You can just look like you're intelligent. You can read a couple of books or read a couple clips, I should say, quotes, quote the author, now you seem like you're a subject matter expert and everyone's done for that agenda. So, and summarizing everything, now going back to choice, because that's where I really want to go to this.
Mm.
How, again, as you and I begin to explore, getting someone to at least, again, I think our goal should be very small and realistic, at least in the beginning. Just getting someone to say, I need to start looking in this direction. Not necessarily walk in this direction, but I at least need to realize that that is a place I want to go. And I just need to start asking questions on how do I go about getting over there. Right. And I think that if we can at least achieve that goal through our podcast and get people to pursue the pathway of becoming fully human and begin to ask questions, so what does that really mean to become fully human? What is, how do I define if I am being fully human in my answers and my behaviors and my thoughts? And am I making connections not only with other people, but first connecting with myself? That to me is where I think we begin our process.
Yeah. I love that. A couple of things are bubbling up for me. One is going back to your brother for a second, and not just so much your brother, but that example. I agree that on a relative basis, he has no choice. On an absolute basis, I would say that someone in that situation has forgotten he has a choice because he's so caught up in that given. It's the 49ers, it's football. And then I love the fact he said, then they start losing and he backs it up a little bit. So it's, the 49ers winning is what it's really about. And I have a taste of that. I'm going to go something I think is more important though to our quest here about what is it we could say to people. But I grew up as a Yankee fan. I haven't watched a full baseball game in years, but I can still remember the first time I walked through a portal with my father at the old Yankee Stadium, probably 1961, 62. And just a night game, just the green grass and the baseball field. And, it was the Yankees. And, it's just got goosebumps. But, I got other things. I have to read all those books, write some things. I didn't have time. But, this year, I check the sports, like New York Times sports page, because the Yankees are winning. They had a great beginning of the season and they tanked in August. Now they're picking up again. And, they're going to be in the playoffs probably. But I'm interested. But I just, I can't, I watch the Major League Baseball puts up like a 7-minute game summary, like the highlights. So occasionally over dinner, I'll just watch a game summary so I can get the highlights. But to sit through a 3 or 4 hour baseball game, can't do it. But back to the essence. So as we were talking about, our bullet points, what are the things? So, some of the ones that are kind of nebulous but really important are, love. Love has to be one of the bullet points. Kindness has to be a bullet point. Generosity, humility. Though. But I go back to Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning and dealing with something much more challenging. Well, much more enormous and close to evil perhaps than the problems we face in the United States today. Although we have some that are really serious. Everything can be taken. He said from a man, but he meant from a human being, except the last of the human freedoms to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances. So if you drop that in a concentration camp, what he was talking about, that's a big deal. Wow. I can choose how to respond to being in this concentration camp, knowing I might die in the next 5 hours or 5 days. And choice is a slippery word in the current US because of pro-choice. That has a whole political meaning. But remembering that we can always choose, that if we're of sound mind and body, to use your part of your regular gratitude check-in, we're of sound mind, we always have a choice. And there was a poem from years ago about, of somebody being mugged and somebody putting a gun to the temple and saying, give me your wallet or I'll blow your brains out. And that's not a great choice, but that's a choice.
Right.
right? I don't have to give him my wallet. I can say no. And, maybe he will blow my brains out. Maybe he won't. And, if he does, bad choice. It's not funny at all. But there's always a choice. Sometimes it's between, the cliche is a rock and a hard place. But we always have that choice. So I think part of that is the beginning. How do you point at your brother in a direction so he says, oh, I do have a choice as to whether or not I commit my Sunday to the 49ers? Because it is, even though it feels like it's not a choice, because he has this, it's this craving. It's kind of like, wanting the next big slice of chocolate cake. I know what that feels like. But I can tell the difference now between a craving and what my body needs. I still eat chocolate cake, so I'm not criticizing chocolate cake. But he's craving the feeling of the 49ers winning. I'm being like a pop psychologist here. But he has the choice. And so I think in terms of getting away from this divisiveness, even if I believe one side or the other on the abortion debate, I have a choice in terms of how I engage the opposition. Even if I don't like Donald Trump, I have a choice about how I speak to a Trump supporter. So this again, that's critical thinking. It's not about the what, it's about the how I engage. So I think that's one of, to get to love and kindness and generosity and humility, maybe recognizing I have a choice is one way in. But maybe we have to come up with a different word besides choice, though, because it becomes pro-choice, then it's going back into the abortion language, and we're effectively screwed on that. So anyway, I'll put a period there.
Well, no, I definitely want to touch on a few points you said there. The first one is definitely Viktor Frankl, someone who I got turned to by Dr. Wayne Dyer, and he helped me see the important. No, I'm sorry, it was not Dr. Wayne Dyer, Stephen R. Covey. And when I read his book, it's one quote that really stood out to me, and I wanted to share that with you, our listening audience. He says, to our point, when we are no longer able to change the situation, we must change ourselves. Right? And so going back to that point where you say you have no choice, and like when you're in the Holocaust camp and you're suffering in that context, you really have no choice, but you had to change yourself, and that's what he talks about. And that's where I'm going with this as well. We have to accept the fact that if you're going to watch social media and you get engaged with that, you're going to watch regular news media and get engaged with that, then you have to understand that you have to change yourself so that you can be prepared to deal with it. And that's what I go through every single day, is changing my mind and myself, or changing my mind, which changes yourself, to be prepared for that day. And so as we talk about our bullet points, you say love. You said, I'm sorry, what was it?
Love, kindness, generosity, humility. Those are the first four that just popped into my head.
Well, I got to throw energy on there. And I say that as I really study, I realize that truly, like Einstein says, energy is everything and everything is energy. And that's really what sets off every single confrontation, every miscommunication, everything is someone's energy. Like literally, when you get on a call with someone, a Zoom call, and I'm doing Zoom calls with total strangers, talk about, co-creating a show together, right? And I'm there with someone I never met, just read your bio, they just read my bio, now we locked in on a Zoom call. Mm-hmm. If my energy is, how you doing? Their energy is going to match my energy, and it's going to be a very short Zoom call. But great Friday, great Wednesday, I'm greeting them like that, and they see the intensity and enthusiasm I have for the conversation because my energy level's there, they match me. And because they match me, we have a great conversation. And so my point is, I really want folks to really understand that the first step has to be the energy. What energy are you getting from the news? What energy? My brother would say he's getting a lot of energy from the sports, but he's not. That's a false energy, because it's like sugar. Yeah, it gets you feeling good, but it dissipates after a while and you need more of it, right? You get to the point of gluttony. You can't stop it. But real energy, you get consumed with it and it lives through you, and you don't seek it. You just live with it and you flow with it. And so that's why I really want to stay energy. But as we reach the top of our hour, I want to give you a chance to have any last comments before we kind of go into our thoughts about who's living, or examples of someone who's fully human.
Yeah, so I love what you said about energy, and I would even argue that love, kindness, humility, and whatever the fourth one I said was, um, um, those are all different types of energy. I
Right,
love
right,
energy. I have you, so
right.
I absolutely agree with that. Um, and part of the work with energy, and the last thing I'll say about that is, for now, is that for a lot of people, if you begin speaking about energy and energy work and working with it, some people think it's woo woo. I'm sure you right. And so, how again to enter that conversation with somebody for whom that would be a new conversation is really important. And the best way is just to point it out, like in a conversation, because you were using the example of the Zoom call. So the first time you and I were on a call was with Kent as well. And one of the reasons that I think we're continuing this, I mean, we respect each other. We like each other. At least I like you, and I respect you. I'm
It's
projecting. Yeah,
equal. It's equal.
yeah. But I think energetically, we're good together. I mean, I tend to be like really. I mean, you have a really high receptive energy. I tend to like. Yeah, I think it's the Italian thing. I talk with my hands a lot. But it's a really comfortable hour for me to be on a call with you. So I love doing this. So I agree that the energy is a big deal.
And with that being said, I would say that my person who I feel as though this week has exhibited building fully human connections would be and I said his name before. I'm gonna say it again just because of the fact is, um, I think that he doesn't really get the recognition he deserves, only for the formula of E squared equals E equals square two, whatever that formula is. So I don't really focus on the formula. I focus on his powerful quotes and the life he lived. Again, that's Albert Einstein, because you really study him, not so much his successes, his formulas, but him as a person and the challenges and the things that he went through. It's phenomenal of how he was able to just really keep himself on purpose. And even Viktor Frankl talks about the importance of connecting to your purpose. That you don't have a purpose, then you really much just lost here in the wilderness. So again, this my person of being a person that's fully human is Albert Einstein. And again, I repeat him because I really want people, and I'm really going to make it my quest to be advocate for energy, because I really am now seeing it's in everything that we do, and if you really understand it, you can pretty much control the conversation with most people, because most folks don't really understand the importance of and the power behind energy, and people really match your energy, um, really for the most part without even thinking about it. So Albert Einstein is my choice for today.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm going to go with. In fact, I mentioned him earlier in this conversation. Just someone a lot of people probably wouldn't have heard of. I hadn't until I heard him speak in a conference. But Dr. Eduardo Duran, who began his training as a clinical psychologist, and found himself working with indigenous peoples in California, and was ill prepared for what they needed from him in his Western model, and learned from his clients and patients, and has spent the last 40 years now working with indigenous populations throughout, mainly in the western part of the United States, and just and works with real different manifestations of energy, in order to honor the beliefs of the indigenous populations as opposed to the beliefs of the Western psychological and religious models that he was actually raised with. So he's just doing this great work in the world, and he was very generous in his response to me as well. So Dr. Eduardo Duran, I'm going to honor him.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And Reggie, again, thank you for your investment of time and energy by joining today's podcast. Again, I always look forward to it as well. It keeps me focused. Your book's a great read. I'm enjoying what I'm reading. I'm looking forward to when it gets out and getting other people's comments, because I believe that we got to deal with these narratives in America. I like to say false narratives that we are believing in. A lot of people are operating from under on both sides, and really become critical thinkers. But most importantly, I want to stress the importance of getting energy. But listening audience, We're at the 11 o'clock hour. Again, I want to thank everyone for listening to our show today. Until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., I wish everyone a productive day, a blessed week, and hope that you all continue to seek how to build fully human connections. Thank you.
Thank you, King.